Hi there, this is another episode of Indie Author Blueprint, and today we're going to wrap up this mini-series that I've been doing on editing. So we've been talking about it for 5 weeks. This is the final one. We're going to be talking about what to do when you get your edits back. Now, I will cover other topics related to editing in future episodes, but this just gives you a summary of the basics. And we've spent some time on it because it's really important for you to focus on editing. This is the most important piece for your readers outside of writing your book. So it's very important for you to not skimp and take shortcuts on your editing. Now, what do you do when you get your edits back? Well, it's really important that you don't just accept all the changes and move on. Don't do it. Your editor made changes for a reason, but it's crucial to go through them line by line because it doesn't mean your editor got everything right. They may not have understood your intent. They may not be correct. Sometimes editors are wrong on the things that they do. Sometimes you need to work on changing it in a different way. And so you need to process through those carefully. Take your time, read the suggested change, and ask yourself if it makes sense for your book. Now, when you're working in Word, and this is what your editor should be working in because this is what we use in book publishing, you should be able to toggle on and off. And this is where those tutorials are out there for you to use on working with Microsoft Word, because you want to be able to toggle on and off the changes. And that means you can look at them actually under the review tab by markup options. You can look at the reviewers. So you can turn off yours if you made some comments or changes in there. But also, if you have multiple people editing, you can look at just one person's changes. But the other thing that you want to be able to do is toggle on and off with simple markup, all markup, no markup, and original. Now, when you get it back, I've had people ask me, what is that line along the left edge? And why are there some things that are marked with a different color? And they've asked me these things because they aren't familiar with Word. And it's really important for you to get familiar with Word because tracking is magical. It's just amazing how it works. So with simple markup, you can see kind of how it looks when it's finished, and you don't see all the crossing out and all the additions and subtractions. It's just kind of like, this is how it will look when it's done. All markup shows everything, the crossed out stuff, the added stuff, and that can get kind of complicated. It just makes my brain hurt when I'm working on it. So I only do that when I need to quickly see what it was that was added and changed, and then I go back to the simple markup. No markup takes everything out, looks like the finished thing. And then the original is really helpful too, because if you want to look back and say, did I say it that way, or was this the editor? You can look and see what you originally wrote. So if something was deleted, it just shows right where you had it. So all of those views are very important when the tracking is on your changes. And right now, when it comes back to you, you should have the tracking on. Your editor should have tracked those changes. So as you're going through, also see if the editor's changes maintained your voice. Does it still sound like you? If not, you might need to tweak the wording to align better with your style. And then as you're reviewing, you can accept the changes that improve clarity, that are grammar things that really needed to be polished up, but feel free to modify anything that feels off. Remember, it's your book. So when it comes back, if you disagree, you don't have to go back and forth. I've had people send me back a list of their reasoning for the way they had it. It's their book. They don't need to send it back to me. Ultimately, the final choice is yours when you're an indie author, unless you have questions. So I'm going to get to that in a second. But if in the end, you just feel like, I feel a little bit misunderstood, I don't know why they edited it that way, just move on. Just do it the way you want to do it and then move on. So once you process all of the changes, then you can click the button to accept all changes and turn off the tracking. Now, that sounds kind of weird because you've already accepted all the changes, but that's how you get it to turn off the tracking. And you want to not just turn it off, because if you just turn off the tracking, anybody who gets your document back again can just turn it on and see all the changes. So if you're somebody who's processed through them and you know there's some stragglers out there and it's still showing some of the changes made, that's why the final step is to save it all then accept all the changes and turn off the tracking. Now, if you send it on to somebody else who's going to do another phase of work for you, or if you were doing this because you're pitching it somewhere and you're not indie publishing, you want those changes off. It's very embarrassing. And I will tell you that I get documents from people where I've actually received advanced reader copies in a PDF that had editing comments in the document because the person didn't realize they were on. So very important to turn that off. Now, let's talk about reviewing comments that your editor gives you. And then we'll talk about some questions that you might ask your editor. So the editor is going to put comments in the margins. They're not going to change everything. Maybe they'll give you a suggestion, but they're thinking, well, this could change the voice. So here's what I think you could do, or you could do this, and then you get to choose. Make sure you process all of those comments because it might mean you still have to edit something, or they're asking you a question, or they're prompting you to think or look at a source. There's so many different things that an editor might put in the comments. So look at all of those too, and you can process through by hitting next, and you can just look at all of them. Now, here's what happens. If something confuses you, go ahead and reach out because your editor is there to help. And maybe you just need a little more info on why a change needs to be made, and then that editor can explain something to you. And I especially appreciate this when a writer wants to learn, when a writer wants to improve their craft so that they can do it differently the next time. So I'm always happy to answer those questions when I'm the editor, but also be sure that if it's something that you could figure out on your own by looking at a grammar guide, go to your Chicago Manual of Style and look it up, because your editor is not there to teach you, like giving you a course. So it's up to you to do some of that work. Research when necessary. Sometimes an editor points out something that you have to research more deeply, and this is an opportunity to grow in your knowledge. It strengthens your manuscript. It grows you as a writer. So go ahead and review the comments and do your research and make those changes. The other thing that you want to do when you get that manuscript back now, and this just builds on what I was just saying, is you want to learn from your mistakes. Editing is not just correcting errors, it's really a chance to learn and become a better writer. So we all have those pesky errors that we repeat. Maybe we overuse adverbs or we misuse punctuation. We just do it over and over and we just don't catch ourselves. That happens. But one of the things I've seen is that I've corrected certain things in writers that I work with frequently. And every time they come back with a new manuscript, they're still making that mistake. And I always wonder, if they process through all the changes I made, why didn't they learn from that and take notes and then change what they're doing when they're writing? Because they're really teaching you through that editing. So take notes on the mistakes you frequently make. Look for what your editor's always changing, and do some work and learn how you can modify that. The reason is it saves you some money in the future. If you need less editing, then you can hire somebody to do more of a proofread and not a thorough edit. And so it's going to save you some money if you learn from those mistakes. Now, one of the things that I said is you can always ask those questions when you're learning from those mistakes, or maybe you want to take a refresher on something, but you really want to have resources on hand that are some of the same ones your editor uses. So, for example, I've had people ask me, explain this rule to me, and then I will just give them the number of the rule in the Chicago Manual of Style so they can look it up on their own, because I don't have time to spend writing a 15-minute email teaching them about what the rules are. So I'll just refer to them. So have those tools on hand. Own a copy of the Chicago Manual of Style so that you can look up some of the things that your editor is doing and learn from those. Now, the final thing that you really need to do when you get that document back and you've processed through, you've accepted the changes, you've clarified all of the questions, you've taken care of all of the comments, now you need to read through everything again. And by now you're really sick of your book and you hate it and you're ready to move on to something new, but you still have to read it more. And the reason you want to read it again is that sometimes there are small errors that slip through the cracks during editing. Sometimes a line or a word is accidentally deleted. Funny characters are added in. Typos are missed. So go ahead and read through it again. Now, be sure that you give yourself a little bit of a break in between before you do this, because I have found that I have fresh eyes when I give myself a little bit of space. If I just keep going and I'm bleary-eyed and I think I'm just going to press on and I'm going to read through it again, I still miss some of those things. So I set it aside, I do something else, and then I come back one more time. And then after that, you're going to be reading it again when it's typeset, so you'll have another chance, but you just want to make sure this is the time when you can catch the most, because it's easiest to fix now, easier than it is after it's typeset. That covers editing and getting your manuscript back. And there was kind of a bonus thing that I wanted to cover here because it ties into editing, but it didn't really warrant its own episode. And that is the role of beta readers and sensitivity readers. Now, this might be a place after you get the edits back from your editor where you would have a beta reader or a bunch of them. For example, I write Bible studies, and it would be the time when maybe some people would go through the Bible study and try it out and see if there are any final changes to make. The nice thing about that is that it is mostly complete, and so they're not getting it with a bunch of errors in it. They're getting a pretty clean manuscript for that. However, one of the challenges with doing the beta readers this late is that if there's a lot of content change to make, then you've already gone through some copy editing and you don't want to introduce new errors by making massive changes. So you have to decide, what is the purpose for having a beta reader? Are they catching plot holes or pacing issues? That's going to need to be done earlier. Maybe they're a sensitivity reader. They're looking at topics related to diverse audiences. And so they might be you're having them read through to make sure you didn't miss something that would be offensive to somebody else. And so that may or may not have to be done early. It could be done later where you're having them just do a final read through to see if you missed anything on that. So you have to decide, what is the goal with having a beta reader or a sensitivity reader? Do I want them to help me with the initial content, or is it just I want to get their feedback right before it goes to publishing? So that just gives you some idea. Now, beta readers are your test audience. So think of them as a trial run. So I said they can identify plot holes and pacing issues, but really they're about enhancing the reader's experience with the book. So if you're writing fiction, they might give you feedback on characters. If you're writing nonfiction, they might give you feedback on whether your sentences are still too complicated and you need to break up paragraphs and how easy it is to follow and all of that kind of thing. Okay. The last thing that I want to talk about is incorporating feedback. Now, you have feedback from an editor. You have feedback from your beta readers or sensitivity readers. You have all this feedback. What do you do? Well, the most important thing to remember is this is all coming from multiple perspectives, and so you have to decide how you can best use it. So different readers are going to have different opinions on what works and what doesn't. You might get editor feedback and beta reader feedback, and they don't even align. Or you might get two different editors who are fighting with each other practically because one changes it and one changes it back. And so your job is to sift through and identify the recurring themes in the feedback and use those as looking at a pattern for what needs attention. But then you ultimately get to decide what you want to change. Every piece of feedback doesn't have to be implemented. And I have seen people go back and forth because every time a different person reads the book, they notice something different or they give some piece of advice. It's not even all correct, but the writers panic and they think if this person reacted this way, then it means other readers will react this way. And they desperately want everyone to love their book. And you have to know that no matter how hard you edit this, how hard your editor works, you're going to have feedback from people that doesn't align with what you really wanted to hear from people. And it's okay. Your book's not going to hit the target for every single person. There will be some things that just someone thinks you should have done differently. And that's part of being a writer. And you have to decide then, what do I change? The other thing to remember in that is that some critiques can sting and some of them have a lot of truth to them. So be open to the tough feedback. Even though, yes, we have to set aside some things and decide, okay, my book's not for everybody. Not everyone loves it. There's also a flip side where, some critiques really hit home, but they actually are true. And the most challenging things you get from your editor, and the ones that really, sometimes you feel your blood pressure go up, and it's almost like I'm embarrassed, but I'm also frustrated and all of those things. That's where we learn and grow. And so I get edited too because I'm a writer, and there are just times when it's like, I don't like even hearing the feedback, but I know I need it and it helps my book to be better. And then the last thing that I want to say as we wrap up is that I want you to remember it's always about the reader. So we're editing to make the reader's experience better. And so when you're editing with the reader in mind, you're still preserving your voice, you're still correcting things, but it's always about how that story hits home or how your content hits home. And then how it really changes lives. It really is about the mission of what you do as a writer. So you're hiring an editor in order to be a better writer, in order for your writing to be better, so that it hits the mark better with the reader. That's where some of the feedback is going to be, break this up here, pace it differently, hit home with that point and don't rush on. Stay here, linger here a little bit longer. That kind of feedback is so helpful when you see that in your edits, because it helps you to step out of this mechanical writing mode of grammar and punctuation and all of that and look at the message of your writing and seeing if that's hitting home with your reader. I hope that all of this makes sense to you. It's maybe a little bit overwhelming as you think about editing, and that's okay, because the more you do it, the better it gets. The more you have somebody edit you, or the more you practice editing yourself, the better your writing gets, the better your next project gets. And yes, I've said in this series already, if I could go back and edit my first book again, I would. I read it and I think parts of it are just terrible, but it's still selling and hitting home for people. And so I just trust that the message is getting through, even though I cringe when I see some of the mistakes that I made in how I did things. So I say that to reassure you that if you don't get it absolutely perfect, your book can still make a difference for somebody. So edit to the best that you can, hire the best editor you can afford, and then move on from there and know that once that is in the hands of your readers, it's the content that matters the most. We're editing in order for it not to be a distraction for them to get to that content. All right. I appreciate you being here today. Next week, we're going to be starting on a new topic. We're not going to be talking about editing. We're going to start talking about design, and we're going to be talking about covers for a few weeks. So if that excites you, come back next time when we talk about covers on Indie Author Blueprint. If you're looking for more content, or if you're looking for past episodes, you'll find everything on Substack under Indie Author Blueprint. And I have lots of bonuses too. It's not just podcasts. So if you just joined the podcast and you haven't been here before, you're going to want to go there because I've created some worksheets. There's content for paid subscribers as well. And so I'm really curating a library of content for indie authors who want to self-publish their books. So check it out on Substack, Indie Author Blueprint.